This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And before we go any further, I just want to make sure that if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast, be sure to do so that way you don't miss out on any new content. But this week, we finished up our series, Hills to Die On, where we've been going through our non-negotiables for the Church of God movement that we are a part of. And so Sunday, you covered the topic of unity within the church, both local and global, worldwide. So Pastor Scott, share with us about that.
Yeah, so we started off talking about that Jesus prayed for all believers, and the thing that he prayed is very interesting, given the fact that there's probably a lot of things that we wish Jesus would pray for us about, maybe to make us healthy or wealthy or just all these different very self-serving things that we wish Jesus had prayed about. But his prayer was that we would be one, that his followers would be unified. And it goes even deeper than that the unity of his followers would be the evidence that he was truly sent from God and that God was pleased with him and that God loved his creation.
Yeah.
And so we started with the idea of how, especially on the global scale, just the church at large, how woefully bad we have been in regards to being an answer to Jesus' prayer. Because we talked about the fact that there's over 30,000 Christian denominations, which I genuinely, I would love to see the list.
Yeah.
I got that number from a book called The Good and Beautiful Community that I read in seminary, and I don't know how we get to 30,000.
I don't know.
But it is bizarre that
Yeah.
could possibly be the case. 30,000 different Christian denominations. And then it kind of hit me as I was preparing, like that doesn't even account for the idea of non-denominational churches, which I believe is a fairly new phenomenon as far as the life of the church goes.
Yeah.
And those are folks that have just completely separated themselves from everybody. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I have plenty of issues with denominationalism, as I do non-denominationalism. One's not right or wrong. Really, the issue is the heart of unity behind all of it, right? Like I would. The issue ends up being that it's all these folks that have separated themselves, but then demonize the people that they separated themselves from.
Yeah.
Rather than just being able to say, no, we disagree on this secondary, third, tertiary issue, periphery issue, but that's still my brother, that's still my sister. We're still, on the same team.
Yeah.
And a lot of these groups can't do that. That's why they split in the first place. They can't just swallow their pride to go, all right, you believe in women pastors, we don't believe in women pastors, but, we understand where you're coming from, and we'll make space for you as long as you make space for us. All right, you speak in tongues, we don't speak in tongues. We understand where both are coming from, we make space for each other, whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
And again, there's definitely primary issues that when we don't agree on the primary issues, then we have, problems.
Yeah.
Right? So if someone's not affirming the Trinity, then no, we're separating from that. That's outside of what Orthodox Christianity has taught. If we're not talking about the virgin birth, we're separating from that. That's not what Orthodox Christianity has taught. If we're talking about salvation by works, that's outside of what Orthodox Christianity has taught. We're going to separate from all of those. If we start messing with the nature of Jesus, he was a God but not the God, and all, no, we're going to separate from that. But those are the historical teachings of the church. Those are the primary issues. All these other secondary issues, you will see that the church has debated them for 2,000 years now and has not come to a conclusion on them, and so therefore we should make room for each other within the church, and there shouldn't be a lack of love and respect across those lines, especially because it's that very thing is meant to be the evidence to the world that God sent Jesus.
Right.
And I mean, it's, that's a pretty significant thing, because here's our goal as Christians is to go and make disciples, and we can't even decide what we actually believe, and yet we want everyone else to come and believe it.
Yeah.
But what is it that we want them to believe? And normally it's your version of Christianity is what you want them to believe. And so it's a big problem on the global scale, the lack of unity that we see outwardly with the church. Locally, this is where we'll probably spend the rest of our time, because I'm not certain that I can or anyone can fix the problem of 30,000 Christian denominations, many of which will never speak to each other. The thing that we have control over is the culture of our church here, which we've always done our best to try to help our congregants understand that we're not at competition with the church down the road. We're not at competition with people that have different beliefs than us, even though we have our beliefs, we stand on our beliefs. Unless it's one of those primary issues that I mentioned, I would consider anyone. We did a end times sermon series a year or two ago at this point, and there's a bunch of different beliefs on that. I don't consider any of those people that disagree with me not my brothers and sisters in Christ just because they have a different view of how the end is going to come. That's a secondary issue.
Right.
For me, you got to start messing with the primary issues for me to want to separate and to call you, outside of Orthodox Christianity. So there was 3 things that I talked about on Sunday of how we guard, because Southridge has largely been a healthy place. Like, we always have stuff pop up, but like compared to what I hear from my friends in ministry, a lot of times I go, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about dealing with the stuff that they've had to deal with. Like, we've had Southridge had their time, where there were some issues, but largely while we've been here, that hasn't been the case. You just have these like small things that'll pop up, and that happens in any organization. So really, rather than talking about how ununified of a church or anything like that, we didn't really have to do that, but rather we wanted to institute a game plan for how we can hold on to
because you talked about like from Ephesians 4 is that like unity is a fact, like it's something that is true, but we have to contend for it, we have to fight for it, we have to make sure that we maintain it. Like, we actually have a role to play in answering Jesus's prayer in the right way. And so
because of Ephesians 4, what it says, one faith, one body, one baptism, one spirit, all of this. The unity of the body is already a fact. And so all the body really needs to do is contend for it. We don't actually create it. Trying to create unity would be a very difficult thing for anyone to do. But to contend for it, to fight for it, right? It's the same thing like in your marriage. You don't create unity in your marriage. When you said I do, you made that covenant between your friends, in front of your friend's family and the Lord. That was it. The unity was sealed in that moment. But now you spend the rest of your life contending for it.
Yes.
You fight for it whenever your husband, your wife is being difficult or you're not doing your part in different ways. You're not trying to create unity. You are fighting for the unity that is already true.
Established,
right. That's what more Christians like, because we need to understand like that level of commitment to anything that we're in, and so there's things that have to be done. And again, just brought up marriage. The 3-step thing that I talked about on Sunday will work in church. It will also work in your marriage. It will also work in your workplace. It will also work on the community organizations that you were part of. These 3 steps right here are not like earth-shattering. I didn't write the book on this stuff. It's just this is how you protect unity in any organization. And so we start with the only way to have unity to begin with is to have a clear mission, vision, and values that the people that are part of the organization are all bought into. seen and heard of many church issues that come about because different congregants have different visions for their church, which then is different than the vision the pastor has from the church, which is then different than the vision that the board has for their church, which is different than this ministry over here has for their church. And what happens is when everybody has their own vision, everybody has this it's this version of silos that just everyone's only concerned about their part of it,
right.
and there's not actual unity in it because there's really only one pie when it comes to resources, like when it comes to money, when it comes to volunteers. And if everybody has their own vision, they're all vying for that one pie, but they only care about their one thing. And that's not the way that a church can function, which is why everybody can't have their own vision and mission and values, which is why it has to come from the top. And this is one of the things a lot of people do not understand how the church, and that's because honestly, and this is, again, I will give correction wherever I see it, but I'm not saying these churches are not my brother and sister. If you're in a church where the lead pastor does not have the final say on the mission, vision, and values and how that church is being run, I'm sorry, I don't think that you're in a model of church that honors what the Bible has called us to whatsoever. These board-led churches that the pastor just ends up being a hired hand, this is not a version of the church that it would be familiar to anything that happened in the early church whatsoever. God has placed the pastor as the head of, as under Jesus as the head of that church. So therefore, that person has to set the mission, vision, and values. The board can't do it. The congregants can't do it. The rest of the staff cannot do it. It has to come from that person that God has entrusted with that congregation. And that's not some weird way of having control over a whole bunch of, it's just this is how it is. If God has established the way that authority has been given in different organizations, then that's the way that it meant to be. If God put somebody in charge of a church, then he meant for them to set the direction. Now, if that person is wise, clearly they will involve other people in the process, right? And they're not lone wolfing it either. They have a board of elders, a board of overseers with them that help keep them in line, that hold them accountable. So I'm not saying just because that person's at the top of the organization that they're like, just off on their own and they can do it. No, they have accountability structures in place. They have people around them that hold them accountable, but that is where the vision, mission, and values has to flow from. It cannot come from the congregation because the congregation wasn't entrusted with the leadership of the church. It cannot come from the associate pastor or the volunteer elder board or whatever. It can't, because that's not who God placed in charge at the head under Jesus of the church.
Absolutely.
And so this mission, vision, values has to flow from the top down, first and foremost. And so we went over that Sunday. For us, our mission, we exist to help people take their next steps on their faith journey. And I really just challenge people, when you're looking for a church, don't look for the place that has the best music. Don't look for the place that has the best preaching. Don't look for the best children's ministry, student ministry, the best facility or anything like that. Find a church that you resonate with their mission. Because the goal is not to attend a place that you enjoy, it's to attend a place that you will engage with their mission. And so if you're not passionate about taking next steps and helping other people take their next steps, then Southridge Church is not the place for you.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we're going to call you to that. Every time you're in this building, you're going to hear about taking your next steps. I told our elder board last night in our meeting, I said, my goal is to make everyone in this church miserable about taking next steps until they do it, to the point where you cannot sit in this church if you're not progressing on your faith journey, because we are not interested in creating a following for Southridge Church. We are only interested in creating followers of Jesus. I'm not interested in how many butts we can put into seats. If we were interested in that, we would just do big giveaways every weekend the way that we do at Easter egg hunts. You get 2,000 people up here any day that I want, as long as the giveaway is big enough. They'll all come. That's not what we are after whatsoever. We are after helping people take their next steps on their faith journey. And then that, our vision, what we want to see as the future of our churches, we want to be the type of church that our community can't live without. Like if we were to cease to exist, that our community would actually miss us. And the sad reality is there are some churches, if they close down tomorrow, their community wouldn't even know the difference whether they were opened or closed, because they do nothing other than have a little service every once in a while on Sundays. Yep. They don't reach out to their communities. They don't do anything in that regard whatsoever. So most of their community doesn't even know they exist. We want to be the type of church that if we cease to exist, that there will be people in our community that would be sad. Maybe they don't even agree with the way that we see the world or live our lives, but that they would mourn the fact that this church did so much good and now we're no longer here. That's our goal. Then we have these agreed upon values which help us make decisions, right? We talk about we before me. Personal preference has no business in the church whatsoever. Again, personal preference is fine if you have personal preference. It just can't drive the conversation. It just can't drive the organization. I have plenty of personal preferences. You have plenty of personal preferences. The 400, 500 people that come to this church have personal preferences, but we have to stifle all of that for whatever is best for the most people.
Yeah, like I remember, so I shared this on Sunday too, like Bob Underwood, who passed away recently. He was part of this church for a very long time. I remember early on in ministry, him telling me, I don't really care for the music here, but I love seeing these young people worship. And so I don't care that I don't like it because it's better for them. And I just remember sitting there, like, that's who I think of, and that story is what I think of when I think of we before me. Yeah. Like, is living out that core value and saying, I'm checking my personal preference because I see that it's better for others.
Yeah, the first funeral I attended once I started working here at this church was a guy named Finley Pettit. And him and his wife Arlene came here for a long time, and they saw all the change. And when Finley passed away, one of the last things he told Arlene, he said, never stop giving to that church. Because even though we don't necessarily like the music and all the stuff that's been going on, I love watching the young people go to the altar. Yeah. Arlene gave to this church. Even after she moved to Tulsa, she gave to this church till the day that she died because they loved watching what God was doing in people's lives more than having their own preferences at their church. Same thing with Harry and Nina Hyde. When they were here before Harry passed away, they would sit on the very back row of this room. They would watch young people worship and go to the altar, and they did not like the music. It was too loud for them. It was not their style, but they loved watching people connect with God, and that to them was bigger than any preference that they could have. We've seen this with countless people, and so now, because of the legacy of people like Harry and Nina Hyde and Finley and Arlene Pettit and Bob and Marie Underwood and Mitch and Marie Zwick and Tom and Linda McVeigh, all these people that have watched this change over all of these years, it's now our turn to do that. That is what we before me is all about. Yep. Same thing, our next value with we're better together. This is why we insist that if you come to this church, you cannot be anonymous. You have to let someone know who you are. Get onto a team and get into a group. Do not make the mistake of just coming to church, because there is no version of God's church where that is the acceptable practice and model whatsoever. This whole idea that all I do is show up is a silly notion. If you go read the Bible, go read Acts chapter 2. Look at what the early church was doing. They met together daily. They shared their resources. They were committed to the word. They were committed to prayer, and they did it all together. They were meeting daily. They were meeting in the temple courts, which was this big public gathering that they would have, and then they were meeting from house to house. These were small groups. That's, again, we didn't just pop out of nowhere this idea that we should have a big group gathering on Sunday morning and then call you to a group throughout the week. We get that from the Scriptures, and the beautiful thing about the Scriptures is that when the early church was doing that, the Scriptures say that the Lord was adding to their number daily those who were being saved. So it was that model of church that actually led to the church getting so large at one point that one of the leaders in Jerusalem said that this nonsense about Jesus of the Nazarene has overwhelmed our whole city with his teaching. The way that it went from this little tiny 120 people in the upper room to the teaching had filled the city, there were so many followers, was when people were doing this. Right. So this model of, well, I just show up, 1.8 times a month whenever it works for me and my kid's schedule, it's a foreign Or when I do come, I don't talk to anyone. I just come in. This is a foreign model of church. It doesn't really exist.
Right.
You have made this up on your own if that's the way that you do church.
Yeah.
The final value, we never stop growing. Right? We mean this spiritually. We mean this as as the amount of people that attend our church. Right? Like when I love it. People come to our church because they think there are other churches in our area that are just too big. Other churches, there's no such thing as a church that is too big.
Right.
There can be churches that are really big and ineffective at what they're trying to do, but there's no such thing as a church that is too big. Right? A church that is too big just doesn't exist. A church that needs maybe a better process for discipleship might exist, but a church that's too big doesn't exist whatsoever. Because our goal should always be to grow. So that was the first step. We have to agree on those things. You can't have your own version of those. You can't have your own mission, your own vision. Like even the ministries of our church, they all need, when they are thinking of the mission and vision in their own ministries, it has to also include what we're doing as a church. So like when we're talking about our kids ministry, if they're trying to come up with a mission, it has to be next step centric. Same thing in youth ministry, same thing in worship ministry, same thing in our discipleship ministry. It all has to be surrounding the idea of next steps, because you can't end up with all these little visions. So then the second thing that we talked about that leads to unity is a clear focus on spiritual maturity. And I will stand behind this statement until the day that I die. Only spiritual, immature Christians cause problems in churches.
Right.
Spiritually mature Christians, they know of problems, but they handle them like adults.
Yes.
They handle them in a good and godly way that leads to the betterment of the organization. Spiritually immature people, they identify problems or create problems, and then they handle them in the wrong way, which ultimately is a detriment to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and I think this is important to remember also that just because maybe you've been a Christian a long time doesn't mean that you're spiritually mature.
Oh yeah, spiritually mature is not years of service.
A new believer, a new follower of Jesus, we have a lot of grace for. You know what I'm saying? Like we have a lot of grace for. They've just begun their discipleship journey. And this is why discipleship and those things that we talked about last week, like that process matters a lot, because if you're not in those groups, if you're not doing these things, you're not going to be discipled in a way that can help you be a spiritually mature person. But I think a lot of times like people equate like maturity with the length of time that you've been following Jesus, and it's just not the case.
Yeah. Oh, I was talking to one of my best friend in ministry yesterday, and we were talking about this, and he said that he had a situation at his church pop up, and there was a big problem going on, and one of the people in the church said, "Man, I'm just so shocked by this because this person is so spiritually mature to be doing this." And he responded, he goes, "What makes you think that they're spiritually mature?" Well, I mean, they just, they've been around so long. Listen, years of service in the church does not equate to spiritual maturity.
Yeah.
It's transformation. There are people that are more, I know people at our church right now that are more spiritually mature 3 years in than some people that are 30 years in. They just are. They have caught a vision of true Christian spirituality in a way that people that have only ever settled for Christian religion just have not it has not captured their heart the way that it has for them. And so it's not years of service, right? And so we ended up talking about a bunch of different sins. I'm not going to get into all of them here, but there's a bunch of different sins that pop up that create division in spiritually immature people, such as gossip, partiality, a lack of forgiveness. Yeah. When we're not showing grace to one another, that leads to problems, all of that. But if you focus on spiritual maturity, those will not be issues for you.
Right.
Whatsoever, and then you won't end up being a problem in the church. And when problems do arise, you can handle them in the proper way so as to better serve the mission and vision to send the organization forward. Right. And
Absolutely.
then the third thing, and this is key, this is what most churches do not do well. Right. Even our church, like I was retraining our elders again last night on this to go, this is how we have to operate, folks. We cannot not, because our staff, we talk about this a lot. We talk about this at our elder board. This is how we have to operate, and we have to handle conflict biblically. Jesus makes it very easy. We're not guessing on how to handle conflict. Matthew chapter 18. If you got a problem with somebody, you go to that person, period. You go to that person. I'll have people, want to come and talk to me about a problem that they have with someone on staff or a problem that they have with someone else in the church. And the first thing I'll ask them, well, have you talked to them about this? Well, no, I wanted to come to you to fix the problem. No. This is not how it happens. We can't circumvent the process that God laid out.
Right.
We have to walk through it because it's actually intentionally designed for the health of the organization, for the health of the relationships. Because if I have an issue with you and I go to you, only me and you know about that.
Yep.
I didn't go and tell anyone else to impugn your character or reputation with them, right? I went to you only, and then therefore, if we're able to work it out, we're the only two that know it happened. But now, if that doesn't work, the next step, Jesus says, bring 2 or 3 people along with you. Okay, so then I involve 2 people. We come and confront you. Now there's a total of 4 people that know about it. And if we work it out, then your reputation is still intact with all of us because we worked it out. Plus, it's still intact with everyone else because they never even knew that there was an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't work. The third step, Jesus says, take them before the church. Okay, then we're going to get all the pastors. We're going to get the elders involved, and we're going to settle this at a larger level. But even then, if there's a good outcome, then everyone's reputation is still intact.
Yeah.
Whereas if we go about gossiping about Cheryl to everyone that we come in contact with, if we go about gossiping about these people, but then, and this is what I've seen happen a lot, let's say that like I've got an issue with you, and I go tell 15 people about how frustrated I am with you, but then me and you work it out, and your reputation is now good with me, I should go to the other 15 people and let them know that we worked it out. But normally that doesn't happen. Right. So therefore, I'm now good with you, but now I got 15 people that are not good with you because they don't know that we came to reconciliation, which is why you should leave all these other people out of it because God is a God of reconciliation. Our job is reconciliation as Christians. We've been given the ministry of reconciliation. This is what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. So that should be our goal. And if reconciliation is always your goal, then you will not involve other people that will then go on to impugn the character of the person that you're trying to reconcile with. So we have to keep, when it comes to biblical conflict, we want to keep it as small as possible, not for the sake of privacy, but for the sake of unity going forward.
Yeah, because I think we have probably had these moments where this didn't happen. Like I think early on in ministry here, I had a situation where actually when I went to this couple, they weren't married, but when I went to them, like our meeting together went amazingly well.
Yeah.
They understood, they got it, things were awesome. And this young couple, like they were newer to faith, newer to church, like I should say back to church, like the one was back to church, but like things went really amazing and they understood. And I felt like, great, this growth that I've been seeing in them isn't going to stop. Like they're going to continue to grow and all of this. And then someone ends up telling them, oh yeah, like I know about that because so-and-so told me and whatever. And it wasn't from me, but it was like someone else whoever brought the issue forward, like knew and had been talking and it had spread and it destroyed that couple, like it destroyed their faith in things. And like, I remember thinking, man, I cannot believe it. Cause I was like, the meeting itself actually went amazingly well. But then because people had gossiped outside of that, like that should have never even known or never been involved, it didn't go well. And I think that that's like part of where it's so important because like, it's not just, a reputation, but it is like, it's people's faith and trust that can be, kind of destroyed in the process. And so.
Yeah. I mean, there's real people on the line for this.
Yeah.
Like when we allow gossip and slander and stuff to just run rampant in the church, there's real people that end up getting hurt and end up walking away from the church, walking away from their faith. And like, it's no good. Plus, if you're one of those people that people come to in those moments, look, don't ever take the word of a gossip.
Yeah.
If they have low enough character to gossip about someone, then clearly you have to think that they also have low enough character to stretch the truth a little bit about that person. Right? So it's just, if someone comes up to you talking about somebody, oh, I can't believe they did it. It's like, no, you're already showing a lack of character, so therefore I have a lack of trust in what it is that you're even saying to me whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right? So it's when people don't act like adults, it's very difficult to trust them. That's what it is. This is why these three things all go together. When we have a clear direction, we're all on the same page. When we're all working on growing ourselves, all on the same page. When we handle conflict in the right way when it comes up, we're all on the same page. It's all about health. Again, you can do this in anything that you're involved in. You want to do this in your marriage? All right. How about you decide what your family is going to be about, and then you hold that standard. You both, in that marriage, work on growing yourselves in every way possible, and then when conflict comes up, you don't fly off the handle. You handle it like adults.
Yes.
That's a really nice way to have a good marriage.
Yeah. There was someone that I knew that I remember every single time she brought an issue to me about her marriage. The first thing I'd always say, have you talked about this with your husband yet? No, I haven't. And I'd be like, why don't you go talk to him? And I will never forget, every single time she'd come back to me, we had a great talk. Everything's good now. I should have just done that in the first place. And I'm like, yes, you should have.
That's the way to do it.
It's so true in so many different ways. And I think that focusing on your own growth is so important, because if I'm focused on my growth and where I need to get better in, I'm not focused so much on the other people's faults and the other people's things. I'm focusing on me and mine, and that's important.
Act like the Bible really knows what it's talking about.
Absolutely.
Because it does.
I loved it when I heard you say that in your sermon, because I thought, you said it's almost like the Bible knows what it's talking about.
It is. Even if you're not a Christian, you could look at this and go, if I was building a business, these are some principles that I would want to be.
Yeah.
Every leader in America knows about the problem of triangulation. The way that triangulation is stopped is literally in Matthew 18.
Yep.
Whether you think that Jesus is the king of the world or not, you got to understand that these things are very valuable to anyone in any walk of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Extra Point. We'll be back again next week. We're starting a new series next week, and so we can't wait to dive deeper into that with you and help share more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.